Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as the war rages on in the Gaza Strip, it's always important to remember that today is the 71st day since the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,400 individuals, including predominantly civilians, some 4,800 wounded, and over 240 people that were kidnapped from Israel, including women, children, men, elderly, as well as infants. As we continue to update you from here in Jerusalem, let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Owen. Amir, update us on the latest.
So, Jonathan, as you said, it's the 7th of October plus 70. And while there are several incidents on the Lebanese border, as well as more and more aggression on the part of the Houthis in the Red Sea, obviously the major story of the day came from Gaza, the tragic incident in which three abducted Israelis were able to flee their captors, and while in one of the streets in Shejaiya, the neighborhood of Gaza City, they were shot because of misidentification by Israeli soldiers. Now, as far as we know, according to the initial after-action review, it started when a marksman, and here we don't have to go into the various terms, marksman, sniper, sharpshooter, but in any event, an Israeli infantryman who is trained in shooting targets from afar with precision. He was on a top floor in an adjacent building and saw three figures, three men walking or perhaps trying to run out of one building, sneaking around the rubble of other buildings. They had no shirts on, which is usually a sign that they have no bombs on them, no detonation vests. One of them held a makeshift white flag to signal surrender, and one of them later called in Hebrew help. Nevertheless, the trigger-happy marksman killed two of them instantly. The third one ran into a building, and then because the marksman told his unit commander that he shot two Hamas fighters, the commander, along with a squad, approached the building. They called on the third figure, we don't call him yet captive, the third figure to come out. When he came out, another soldier killed him. And then they found out that one of the three was a red-haired Israeli. They started suspecting that they committed a fatal error, and later on forensic investigation, it was found that this indeed was the tragic result. Now, what that means is, first of all, that the forces were not properly briefed on trying to find out first whether these are or not captives who managed to flee, or according to another theory, abandoned in a building when their captors left, and that there was no intelligence regarding the whereabouts of these hostages. And also, this gives rise to claims that sometimes Israeli soldiers shoot to kill even innocent civilians because they were not armed. And it was seen by the marksmen that they had no weapons on them. So all in all, a very tragic incident. and perhaps even a turning point in this war, because the pressure by the families of the 130 or so captives still left in Hamas custody, and by the public at large on the government to renew negotiations on a hostage deal is mounting. And the Mossad chief, David Barnea, according to some reports, has left for Europe in order to meet with the Prime Minister of Qatar and resume negotiations.
Indeed. Well, I have a hard time with the term trigger happy. I think that when you're in a battle environment and there's ongoing activity that takes place all around you, with every battle taking between 15 seconds to 30 seconds, if you weren't on the highest level of alert for an extended period of time in order to contend with those surprise attacks by the Islamist terror operatives who are at times just walking underneath you in subterranean tunnels, I understand the soldiers being over vigilant and their judgment at times is clouded. Nevertheless, this very sad moment, I think that this soldier will take this moment for the rest of his life and will be punished for it in reliving this moment over and over and over again. I think to avoid such a scenario with additional troops, the lessons learned need to be immediately implemented in a manner that, in the event when hostages manage to escape, whether or not the captors left before or not, that's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is they managed to escape, and the IDF did not treat this incident the way it should have. And hopefully this will not reoccur. Now, let's turn to Central Israel. I'd like to ask...
But Jonathan, just a moment. You are right about the general envelope of what happens, of course, in such combat tension. But here, the soldier acted against the rules of engagement and the standard operating procedure, which were established exactly for such situation. He did not ask permission. Perhaps a more mature supervisor would have told him to hold his fire.
Indeed. Well,
yes, but I must jump in here, Amir, because you were describing it very longly and very thoroughly. But I think that we also have to look on the other side, on the Israeli soldiers that were there. First of all, we are all sure that they didn't want to kill Israeli hostages. This is number one. They are doing everything to save Israeli hostages. This is the main goal of this war, and those are the orders. This is number one. The second thing, we have to remember that at the same arena, the same battalion, the same brigade, and the same platoon, basically, they had a situation that 9 of them were killed because the Hamas was using all kinds of tricks in order to drag them in. So in their state of mind, although it was a mistake, I'm not saying that it was not a mistake, of course, but in their state of mind was that they are in a vicious fight with those terrorists that are doing everything they can in order to drag the Israeli soldiers into all kinds of traps. They sounds also sounds of babies, others that are calling in Hebrew. So for them, that if someone was, sounding a voice that was in Hebrew, it doesn't mean for them for sure that this is someone who is Israel. So we have to remember what is the context. And of course it is a mistake, but I think that we shouldn't color all the, the way that the IDF is fighting with some mistake. I think that we have to appreciate the IDF for coming out with the story very openly to share his mistake again, even in in the media. This is nothing to take lightly. This is something that needs to be, I think, really appreciated. And it shows that the IDF wants to learn from such an incident. The lessons are being learned, and I'm sure that the commanders will do whatever they can in order that something like this won't happen again. And I really agree with what was said by Jonathan, that I'm sure that those soldiers will take this incident with them for all their life. So very unfortunate, but I think that we have to come out of this situation better, to take those lessons learned and to do whatever is necessary on the fighting itself.
Thank you, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, namely the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense Commander. I'd like also to bring into the discussion Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen, the director of the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University and a longtime member, if I may add, of the intelligence community in Israel. Colonel Eisen, I'm very keen on hearing what you have to say about this.
I've been thinking to myself about human beings. Just think for that second of that soldier, those group of soldiers who at the end, let's remind ourselves, are what, 19, 20, 21? I want all of our viewers to remember this. They've been trained. They most definitely made, Doron called it a mistake. It's like, in that sort of sense, it's that kind of thing that you do. And all I'm thinking is, well, they could have been the heroes. And instead, for the rest of their lives, what they did is going to haunt them. And in this case, when we talk about the last 7 weeks, or as Amir put it, 7 weeks, 7th October in a day, when we talk about these 7 weeks, and it's so hard to comprehend what we're going through inside Israel, I don't think we comprehend what's happening also to the military troops. They have been fighting for weeks on end. It's very edgy. The fight inside Shajaiya is exceedingly difficult. And together with that, I don't think that they necessarily have the same impact, Amir, of what's happened on everything that has to do with the hostages, the way that it does in Tel Aviv, where there was a protest. And I don't say this is good or bad. I just say that the complexity of our lives in Israel right now, of those of us who are very much impacted by the hostage horrific situation, and that need as Israelis, as part of our lives, to bring back the hostages, and the fighting of the military forces inside the Gaza Strip, and the fact that we constantly say we need to find the hostages, and until now, it hasn't been, that sort of, yay, 1976, let's free them all in one amazing operation. It's kind of like this disconnect. And I feel that everything came together last night when we all felt our hearts fall for the soldiers who made a horrific error. Even if it was a trigger-happy error, it was an error. Horrified for the families who have to live with the fact that they were alive until they were killed by Israeli soldiers. And horror for all of us that in this situation, Hamas has put us into a place where look at where we are right now. We can't even distinguish always between these terrorists and between our own hostages after 7 weeks in captivity, where the soldiers themselves have such an enormous moral onus on their shoulders right now. And I say that as just part of this conversation, as we look at it, not as an intelligence officer, as a mother, as a colonel, as everything together, that there are no easy answers, and that this is not the last time we'll be in impossible situations inside this area called the Gaza Strip.
I think it's important to once again highlight the objectives of this war, since they are quite broad objectives, if I may add, but there is one concrete objective, and that is, of course, rescuing the hostages in all means necessary. And the second objective, which accompanies it, no less important, is to ensure that this atrocity that occurred on October 7th would never happen again, and bringing about this reality that it never will reoccur entails destroying the Islamist Hamas and all terror infrastructure, including governing capabilities and military capabilities of this internationally designated terror group. But Mr. Oren, nonetheless, the one effort seems to impede the other. and the two don't always converge. How does the government or the leadership in Jerusalem deal with such a complex reality?
Well, there is the added constraint of American pressure, perhaps even American directives. And we are right now in midpoint between the visit by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the visit of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. And obviously, what the administration is trying to signal to Israel is that it expects the IDF to end one phase of the fighting, the high intensity combat operation, probably with the encirclement of Khan Yunis and perhaps raids into Rafah, which is south of Khan Yunis, between Khan Yunis and the Egyptian border, and then start a new and reduced phase, which is called stability operations, focused more on the Hamas leadership, including targeted killings, but not using aircraft and tanks in such a visible way that public opinion will put pressure on President Biden, who is now acting under domestic electoral pressure. And therefore, Israel will have to tailor its operations according to what it is asked, because it cannot operate against the American wishes, especially since it needs American assistance against Hezbollah to contain Iran, and in order to organize the maritime task force around the Red Sea, as the Yemenites, if they know their Yiddish, as they more and more intensify their chutzpah.
Well, I want to point out one double standard before we get more of an in-depth review on the current state of play in the Gaza Strip, and that is when the United States invaded Afghanistan, subsequently also Iraq, and even before that, in all conflicts that it engaged in, it did not provide humanitarian support to zones of conflict until after the enemy was defeated. And this scenario in which the Biden administration has time and again forced Israel to perpetrate this war to a certain degree, in my view, because it's streamed in humanitarian goods, yes, to the people of Gaza, but time and again, we see Hamas or other terror operatives seizing much of this humanitarian goods and then diverting it for their own purposes. Same goes with oil. Israel stood firm against oil entering Gaza. Nevertheless, now this same oil is fueling the energy necessary in order to ensure that all of this subterranean infrastructure of Hamas remains operational, And therefore, when we, on the one hand, hear the Biden administration to cut the time and then try and avoid collateral damage, you cannot constrain Israel, force it to prolong the war by enabling those same terrorist organizations, and at the same time expect this to go faster than what any other military could do, particularly with all of the failures that occurred in the last battles that we see north from Israel, which the Biden administration tried to back wholeheartedly with, and justifiably, if I may add, in Ukraine, of course. But General Gavish, what is the current state of play in Gaza? How far are we into this situation? And how many stages are we expected to see in the next medium to long term?
Well, Jonathan, you raised a very important point, and I will come back directly to your question in a minute. But one of the challenges that we see from the intelligence and also from common sense is that once Sinwar and the leaders of the Hamas, they understand that there is an end, very close end to those strikes by Israel, for them it's a great encouragement. They think to themselves, okay, let's hold on a little bit more. even if they would be close to a breaking point, they would say to themselves, if we would push it a bit more, if it would take a bit more time, then the pressure on the Israelis would be built, and this is basically working in favor of the Hamas. So this is something that we all must remember, and Israel have to really work and to find the balance between all those tensions, the international and I would say atmosphere for one side, of course, the United States, but at the end of the day, Israel must look on the main two goals of this war. And one of them was bringing the hostages, and the other one is the destruction of the Hamas as a military force and as a ruler of the Gaza Strip. And if at the end of the day, Israel, the military, the cabinet, will come to the understanding that we are being restrained in such a way that we wouldn't have to, or we wouldn't be able to gain those goals or to achieve those goals in the war. I think this would be a very hard decision for Israel, but I've got a strong feeling that Israel is determined and would be determined even in when it would be in this point to gain the goals of this war with all the challenges that it could bring to it. I don't really see any other result of this war than achieving at least the majority of the goals that Israel set up. And as I said, it would be, to finish this war without the Hamas being destroyed or being in a point that they are not anymore the ruler of the Gaza Strip would be basically to lose this war. And I don't think that Israel could allow itself to do it. By the way, I don't think that it is an interest of the Western world that something like this would happen, because the implication of the Hamas coming out of this world with the victory pictures is a devastating, I think, to the world who is fighting terrorism. So, this is my take on this. For the situation in the last few days, it's quite, I would say, the same. Israel is enlarging its operation on the main neighborhood. We saw the fights in Sajaiya, in Jabalia, and also around Khan Yunis, going also inside the city of Khan Yunis, in the vicinity of the house of the leader of the Hamas, Sinwar. So Israel is doing whatever it can in order to press the Hamas and to bring it to a point that they would understand that at least if they want to stay alive, they would have to surrender or to fight till the end. This is the situation, unfortunately.
Thank you, General Gavish. Two brief points, because I want to also grant Colonel Eisen as much as possible time. But people need to understand that all those protesters going out to the streets all over the world calling for a ceasefire means literally granting immunity to those same savages who took an infant and put him in a baking oven and killed him that way, who cut a belly of a pregnant woman and tore out the baby while she was still alive. The same savages who raped a mother and butchered a father in front of the children before taking them into captivity. Those are the people who will get immunity, and this is what a ceasefire means, and people need to understand this. Colonel Eisen, why don't people understand this?
Isn't that the question that we're all trying to ask inside Israel right now? Not only that, but there's a growing gap. You would have thought after 2 months that the gap would have perhaps been bridged, but not at all. So first of all, I'm going to say something harsh on this channel that I've never said before. In the world, to me, it's hardcore anti-Semitism. I've never said that before. I have changed my opinion over the last 7 weeks. For the way that it's come out in that sense, the double standard that has to do with the state of Israel on every single aspect. And I am exactly the person who's always been the one who has said nuance and differences. And I'm not saying that anymore. I'm standing here right now and saying very clearly that that double standard is only about the Israeli state, is only about the Jewish state. It's only about our right. I say it as a woman right now talking to the television. I say it right now as a woman that no women in the world are willing to acknowledge what happened to Israeli Jewish women in an attack which is unheard of, and they don't want to hear. Why don't they want to hear? If it's Rwandan woman or if it is anywhere else in the world, they'll hear, but not if it's Israeli Jewish women. So yes, that's a gap. And I'm standing here right now and saying it clearly. And I put that gap there hand in hand, that the rest of the world are looking at this war as an Israeli war. Remember the anti-Semitism I said before, and that this war is not part of their issue. They think that this is part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they blame us for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict pretty much from A to Z. And I said this right now in a very harsh way. I'm usually much softer about some of the things that I say. I feel after 7 weeks that the fighting itself, to me, has only made the gap go bigger, in the sense that here we are, and we do not see an end to the war, and we understand that in Israel. And everywhere else, it's about letting terrorists build on exactly what we're trying to call out, meaning safe haven for terrorists are behind civilians. Safe haven for terrorists are when they take hostages. They're the ones who are getting that free card in that sense. And again, I think that the military action itself is harsh and hard. But Jonathan, in this case, that's to me the growing gap. And I think I said it very clearly.
Mr. Oren, you have 2 sentences left, and I'd like to ask you particularly about the trip of David Barnea to the chief of the Mossad, who is about to meet with the prime minister of the one nation that is robust in disinformation and ratcheting up all of this hatred directed towards Israel, and at the same time, not only against Israel, by the way, but also against the United States and the West at large, but they're playing in all weddings, and it seems that the international community doesn't truly understand it or has too much leverage, including corruption throughout Western Europe, unfortunately. But what is the dynamic in those conversations with the head of that nation, who also has enough leverage over Hamas in order to force him to deliver a certain deal?
So regardless of what the Americans really think and say to themselves, outwardly, they only praise Qatar as an ally and partner of the United States. And Secretary Austin will visit Al Udeid Air Base, the biggest U.S. Air Force base in the region, when he comes there next week. And apparently, the Qataris have some influence over those Hamas leaders of the political wing who have been living in Qatar, but they are not necessarily in touch with Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. Now, what the Mossad chief was probably asked to do, which the Israeli government did not want to do 2 weeks ago, was to present some points, some outline of what Israel might accept, rather than wait for a Hamas initiative in order to move the frozen hostage deal into a new track.
Thank you, Mr. Oren, and I'd like to immediately also thank Colonel Eisen and General Gavish for taking out of your times to update us on the latest. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well, and to wish all of us better times until our next update. Shalom from Jerusalem.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.